Barcelona are named the UEFA Women's Champions League 2022-2023 champions after a dramatic 3-2 win over Wolfsburg in the final. So, let's talk about it. This was the Spanish Giants' third consecutive final and second title in their history after a defeat against Lyon in last year's final. Whereas for the German side, this was their sixth final in their club history, and it was a chance to grab a third title out of that. Before we jump into all the analysis and gameplay, quickly to remember, Wolfsburg had to beat PSG and Arsenal in the quarterfinal and the semifinal to make it into the stage. They hadn't lost a single of these legs. They drew 2 out of the 4, but won the other 2. For Barcelona, they had to get through Roma and Chelsea in the quarterfinal and the semifinal, respectively. So now we meet in Eindhoven in the Netherlands for the first time ever, a sold-out stadium for the Women's Champions League final. Over 34,000 people in attendance. We were promised fireworks, we got fireworks, so how did it play out, and what was the changing point for Barcelona that led them to have a comeback and eventually become the winners? It was a game of two halves, Wolfsburg going 2-0 up in the first half and looking pretty much in control in terms of playing the football that they wanted to play, imposing a really good man-marking system as well as a very high press, deploying Jane Jonsdottir and Pahor on the wings with Pop as the main woman in the middle. Jane Jonsdottir was given the task of running around in the spaces that Rolfo would leave behind, considering that Barcelona loved to play an asymmetrical inverted wingback situation. So whenever Rolfo was up, usually she's the winger going up, she would likely leave a fair amount of spaces behind. Obviously, there is other ways to manage that, but in general, Rolfo, when she is able to push up a little bit, Jonsdottir was given the task of being able to exploit these spaces. On the other wing, it was Lucy Bronze, who had just come back from injury after having a very minor knee surgery. So she certainly had a little bit of a rusty start, and she had to deal with Pahor, which is not the easiest task to do, but was able to stabilize and pick up the pieces as the game went on. Pahor not only able to score that incredible first opening goal of the game, but was also the player behind Pop's assist. So she led that first half with an assist and a goal. That's 2 goal contributions out of 2 goals. Certainly a very bright half for the player. I mean, it has been a very bright season for her in general. Within the space of 3 minutes in the second half, Barcelona was able to equalize. So what changed? What did they tactically move around that really caused this entire thing to change completely? One thing that Barcelona loves to do, and they certainly know how to execute it very well, is having superiority in the midfield. Really, this game was won in the midfield. In the first half, Wolfsburg was able to really properly man mark, and they were able to close off any passes in the midfield for Barcelona, not really able to create any chances, not able to have any of that tiki-taka passes that we usually see. Whereas in the second half, changes in Barcelona gave them the superiority in the midfield, where it was a little bit too much for Wolfsburg to handle and a little bit too late for them to even notice. Selma Paralolo was moved inside, which gave Rolfo the opportunity to be playing as a natural left winger rather than a left back, and that kind of opened up the opportunity for Mariana Caldente to drop into that midfield. Shifting those players around meant that Wolves needed to drop deeper a little bit to kind of offer a little bit more stabilizing, considering that Rolfo was pulling as a left winger now. Looking in this first half setup, you can tell that Caldente is the left winger player here placed, and Rolf was supposedly playing behind her, but there was a clear need for a player in the midfield to be producing. So you can tell that Rolfo dropping deep in here, really she shouldn't even be in this position, but wanting to get the ball going, wanted to have some kind of midfield movement and even try to the ball next went to Carolina Graham Hansen, who was also in a way a game changer because she was able to get a little bit more service in the second half when tactically things shifted. But this was a moment where even the players were starting to recognize, and this was at the end of the first half anyway, where there was a lack of superiority in the midfield. Out of possession, and when Wolfsburg had the ball, they were able to clearly pretty well man mark. Rolfo deployed as a left back had to stay behind, where you can clearly tell Jonsdottir is on her as well. Selma and Candente in the middle, but again, quite restricted in terms of personnels in the middle. There was really bright glimpses when Rolfo and Caldente were able to work together, but what you wanted here is that you wanted Rolfo to have the main ball and be the creator, and Caldente was the one making the run to receive that ball, not the other way around, which is what we saw in the second half. This was a moment of turnover from Patry, again, close man marking, Rolfo very behind in the left back position, Caldente quite isolated from what the midfield work is happening, not what you wanted to see. Second half rolls around, and from the first kick of the ball, you can already tell there was a different setup. Rolfo deployed as your winger, Patry able to drop in the middle, and Caldente operate as a midfielder. Like I mentioned earlier, because you were taking Rolfo from that defensive side, you were kind of committing another player in front, which is why Walsh had to drop in a little bit deeper. And I think she executed this perfectly because she had to work very well with Mapillon and Irene Paredes. This was in build-up of the first goal, and because they were able to add the extra body into that midfield, Carolina Graham Hansen was getting a lot more service. Two things here. Carolina Graham Hansen being involved in any kind of attack is super, super, super crucial. In my opinion, continues to be one of the most underrated attackers in the game. I would personally put her in like my top 4 or 5 players that I love watching, and she's just so good. She's fast. She's a good dribbler. She can finish. She's so spatially aware. She's always making runs. Like she's just so good. Now back to the build up, different than what we saw in the first half. As you can tell, Rolfo is the one behind Caldente, and Caldente is in the middle. Patry here, she's given the ball to Carolina Graham Hansen, which is what led to the goal because she's able to make the run and go into the box and receive the ball and obviously score. Something to point out is that Huth is marking Patry here. She's also marking her in the second goal, but certainly a player to make note of because we will talk about her in a little bit. A few moments later, Carolina Graham Hansen also involved in the ball in the second half. She actually got triple the amount of touches in the second half that she did in the first half. Patry in the middle, Caldente right behind her. You couldn't really tell, but when they panned out, Rolfo was also behind them. That is kind of the line that they were looking to establish. Caldente and Patry in the middle, with Bonatti being that marker or running to make everything stick together between Carolina Graham Hansen and the midfielders. This was for the second goal where Patry gets the header and Caldente is behind her. Very interestingly, in the first goal, it's also Patry with Caldente right behind her. Them two making the runs behind each other was absolutely crucial. Now, like I mentioned, Huth is here marking her in the first goal. Huth is also marking here in the second goal. But what you can tell is Huth is behind her in the second goal. She's also behind her in that first goal. Huth was given the responsibility of marking these runners in the midfield, one of which was Patry. Huth, in my opinion, a lot more of an attacking midfielder than a defensive midfielder. Now, this is not to say that Huth cannot defend and mark. I mean, she was given the same defensive responsibilities in the Arsenal game. She was given the responsibilities to mark some of their wing backs and mark some of these runs as well. But Patry is just simply different gravy, and I really don't think Wolfsburg had still even understood what changes took place. I mean, she was marking the runs in there, but all of a sudden now she's marking Patry when she was a little bit on the wing, and then you had Caldente also a little involved. So you can tell there was a little bit of confusion in terms of they couldn't adapt too fast, and within the space of 4 minutes, it's all 2-2 again. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is how Barcelona is able to pull it up in the second half. Minor changes, incredible work by Patry and Caldente, as well as Carolina Graham Hansen and Rolfo all adapting together. Heal your opponent's momentum and confidence, build your own, and most importantly, establish that midfield superiority, which was the game-changing movement in the entire game. Circling back to where Wolfsburg was incredible in that first half was that they were very good in the press, the man marking, like I mentioned, as well as very, very defensively good in reading what Barcelona was doing. Only 2 minutes in, you can tell they are flooding the spaces here, a little bit higher than you would expect them to play, but Bahor again making the runs. Pop, if there was any mistake to capitalize on, she is, I mean, a literal genius on capitalizing on mistakes, operating that upper striker zone. Clearly, with this press, they forced Lucy Bruns to make a mistake, and seeing the amount of players that they have within that area, it was almost inevitable. Either she's going to finish based on the form that she's on, or some other elite player around her was going to pick up on these mistakes of the opposition, because really that's where Wolfsburg is super, super clinical. They will punish you for mistakes, and really interestingly here is that when they press, they are always in a line like this. In an earlier video, which I will definitely be recommending if you want to learn a little bit more about how Wolfsburg press, this is a pattern that you see every time they press. Having that line with the midfielders or the attackers that they've set up to kind of like literally stand exactly in a line and make sure that that doesn't go backwards at a certain area is just key to how they press. And that was also part of why they were able to win that battle of midfield and superiority, because of that midfield plus the discipline, the one-on-one marking. Almost, you've got Jane Sutter, who we talked to a little bit earlier about how she was deployed within that area to work around the spaces that Rolfo would leave behind. Bruns in the first half noticeably rusty and was going up against a player who is not rusty one bit, really fast, really pacey. Now, this was not an attack that ended up in anything dangerous. It was lost in the build-up. But plays like this and positions like this happened a little bit too often in the first half. Not really seen in the second half, obviously clearly because of the midfield stabilization, but also Bronze kind of actually getting into the game and stabilizing herself a little bit more. Barcelona in the first half had 6 low crosses, so they didn't go over. It was just a direct pass cross, and Wolfsburg read every 6 of these passes. Often it's Barcelona shirts that are flooding into the box and outnumbering the amount of opposition players within that area. Not the case this time because Wolfsburg was very good in reading what Barcelona was trying to do. In a concession of about 67 minutes, Barcelona had 3 of those low passes here in the 11th minute and then again in the 15th minute. Jens Dotter clearly is the one after Rolfo. She, in my eyes, put in a really good shift defensively and offensively. You'd probably want your fullback as the one who's making that run in case of a counterattack. Jens Dotter would be available considering her pace as well. Wilm's clearly behind on both of these runs, and Jens Dotter is the one up working with Rolfo. But again, taking another look at the box here, Wolfsburg are outnumbering the amount of Barcelona shirts. You're playing man marking, and you're playing another defender who is ready to catch a rebound or just defensively holding another option that Barcelona will not get to the ball. That was really the brilliance of the game, is that Wolfsburg had a great first half, pressed how they wanted to press, how they usually press, man marked, and was very incredibly aggressive. Again, that German side aggressiveness that a lot of these German sides portray always. Defensively solid, really good in reading what Barcelona was doing, but the second half was a completely different story, moving around some of these players, putting in an extra body into that midfield. Patry, what an incredible player, really rising to the occasion. And that's exactly what I love about players like this, is that they can go under the radar a lot. And it's opportunities like this that when they rise, you just absolutely love to see it from them. Flexibility and adaptability from both Rolfo and Carolina Graham Hansen, not an easy thing to do, again, under the crazy amount of pressure. You're 2-0 down. And I think Wolfsburg are really, really going to be beating themselves up because you cannot let a 2-goal lead slip up, and they did this also in the semifinals against Arsenal in the first leg at home. They were a little bit too late to react to the changes that Barcelona made in the second half. Confidence clearly really killed. Substitutions, I'm not sure if they were the exact right ones. I also don't know how Tabea Vazmuth has fallen so much out of favor from the Wolfsburg squad this season. I would have enjoyed seeing her come on the pitch because really, if Wolfsburg had equalized, this could be a very different narrative. But the reality is after Rolfo's 3rd goal, which pretty much killed the game, Wolfsburg did not have a single shot on target, or they didn't have a single shot anyway in the last 30 minutes. So yes, in some ways the game was open because Wolfsburg was very clinical in the first half. They really only had a few attacks going forward. They were stable, rigid, quite efficient. And again, that could have been the scenario in the second half had they attacked once or twice. You applaud Barcelona for their mentality, for their ability to just grit it out. I'm sure a lot of these players had flashbacks of last year's final. The first goal was almost similar to Henri's, and it was like it's going to be another scenario of that. But they delivered a comeback, an incredible dramatic game that it was incredibly enjoyable to. I'd love to hear your opinions on how this final was, how the season was in general, what you thought of this analysis, and kind of did you see these changes take place on Barcelona's pitch?